Hello, and welcome to the Frontlines of Social Good. I'm Jay Frost, and it's a pleasure to have you here. This, of course, is the weekly news and views program from the Philanthropy Mastermind series brought to you by our friends at DonorSearch. And we're going to begin, as always, with the top 5 gifts of the week, as well as a look at the headlines shaping the philanthropic landscape. And then later in the program, we're joined first by Bill McMorran, the senior partner at Green Oak Consulting, to break down what the new federal tax laws mean for nonprofits. We'll explore how these changes could reshape your fundraising strategy as well. And then in the second half, we'll shift gears from policy to purpose with Lieve Hendren, senior consultant at the Alfred Group and author of The Joyful Flow Formula. She'll share a framework for bringing renewed energy, alignment, and joy to your fundraising practice and your life. So let's get started. First of all, the top 5 gifts of the week. Coming in at number 5, the Republic of Korea has made its largest ever contribution to UNICEF's work in Syria, $15 million to support children and families affected by conflict, displacement, and recent natural disasters. The funds will provide essential health, education, nutrition, water, and sanitation services. Coming in at number 4 this week, the Yale School of Medicine has received a $27.7 million grant from the National Institute of Mental Health to support a national effort focused on early autism research. The 5-year grant will fund the development of a non-invasive biomarker or set of biomarkers to identify children as young as 12 months who are on the autism spectrum. Number 3, Sydney and Carolyn Kimmel have pledged $28 million to Jefferson Health and the Sidney Kimmel Medical College. The gift will fund the transformation of Jefferson's emergency department and advance research in immunology and neuroscience. Number 2, Bard College has received a real estate portfolio valued at $50 million from the Galvin Foundation. The donation will support the college's mission and long-term sustainability. And in at number 1, the Kochkar Studios, a cultural and religious heritage foundation, has committed $100 million to expand Armenian Apostolic Church ministries across the U.S. The initiative will support the construction and renovation of churches, schools, and cultural centers. Have we missed a big gift announcement this week? We almost certainly have. Let us know by contacting me directly through LinkedIn or by email through our sponsor, DonorSearch. My email address there is j@donorsearch.net. Now, here are some of the most important stories shaping the nonprofit and philanthropic sector just this week. First up, a new Senate rescissions package targeting government spending has stirred significant concern in the nonprofit and public media spaces. According to CBS News and other outlets, the legislation proposes cutting $8.3 billion in unspent foreign aid and rescinding $1.1 billion from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which supports NPR and PBS. Supporters argue the cuts are necessary to rein in federal spending, while critics counter that the reductions could undermine global development efforts and gut critical media outlets, especially in rural communities that serve as civic lifelines. The Senate is expected to hold an initial procedural vote as early as this Tuesday, today, or Wednesday, with a final decision required by law by July 18th. In other news, the Chronicle of Philanthropy reports that philanthropic strategist and author Edgar Villanueva, through his organization Liberated Capital, is helping to launch a $200 million endowment that will be entirely Black-led, Black-governed, and focused on funding Black individuals and organizations. The project builds on the California Black Freedom Fund, a statewide initiative originally incubated at the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, which has already raised $100 million and granted nearly half of it to 206 nonprofits to date. The Internal Revenue Service has joined a legal effort that could significantly weaken the Johnson Amendment, the law that prohibits nonprofits, 501c3 nonprofits, including churches, from endorsing political candidates. 2 churches in Texas, backed by the National Religious Broadcasters, have argued that the restriction violates their constitutional rights. But the IRS declined to defend the amendment in court, and instead filed a statement of interest, supporting the church's position for the first time. As the Nonprofit Times reports, critics worry that this could lead to an influx of political activity masked as religious speech and potentially open the door to tax-deductible donations being funneled into electoral campaigns without oversight. New national survey data shows that nonprofits are continuing to enjoy strong public trust, with 57% of Americans expressing confidence in nonprofits more than in business, government, or media. These findings come from the latest Trust in Civil Society report from Independent Sector, which also found that people are more likely to trust nonprofits that are community-based, diverse, and transparent about how they use their donations. However, the trust does not extend equally across the sector, and only 33% of Americans surveyed say they trust philanthropy, a term associated more with foundations and high net worth giving than with local charities. And in our top story, on July 4th, President Trump signed H.R. 1, known previously as the Big Beautiful Bill, after a narrow Senate vote of 51 to 50, with the tie-breaking vote cast by Vice President J.D. Vance, and then followed by a party-line House passage of 218 to 214. According to the Council on Foundations, key tax provisions with direct relevance for philanthropy and fundraising include, and we'll be discussing these in more detail in a moment, a universal charitable deduction for non-itemizers, a capped deduction rate for itemizers, a corporate giving floor, a 21% excise tax on high salaries, and a number of other things that we'll be discussing in just a second. Nonprofit leaders are now considering how these shifts may affect fundraising, donor behavior, and financial strategy, especially as IRS rulemaking gets underway to iron out the details and bring greater clarity to this new law. To navigate the implications of the legislation, we're joined, of course, by Bill McMorran, senior partner at Green Oak Consulting. Bill has over 40 years' experience in philanthropic tax policy and charitable strategies, and he's advised Congress, the IRS, AARP, and dozens of nonprofits and foundations nationally. I was just speaking with Bill, of course, at the Giving Institute's Summer Symposium a few days ago, and he was kind enough to be willing to come here today and to help shed light on this very large and complicated bill. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Jay. It's good to be here. I appreciate it. And I love talking about taxes, so I'm excited.
Well, I'm excited to have you here. And if for no other reason, it's great to have your company, but also because I understand very little about what's in this thing. And I did read through it. The final bill was, or the act rather, is over 900 pages, I believe. Is that right?
Rounded up, I think it was 887, but again, don't quote me, please.
Well, that's the least of the things we have to fact check here. Maybe we can start with something that's broad, which is that based on all your experience, and you have plenty of it across policy and practice, what kind of changes should nonprofits be paying the closest attention to?
Wow, big question. Certainly, we should look at the nitty gritty of the charitable benefits that are in it. You mentioned the above the line deduction for non-itemizers. Remember in 2020 during the pandemic, the government, the Congress passed legislation that allowed any individual who made charitable gifts to deduct $300 off the top of their income before they calculated their standard deduction. So it was a small savings in 2020 for many people. But then couples got angry and said, wait, there's two of us, we can only deduct 300. They made it 600. This above the line deduction is something that the charitable, and I use the word charitable industry, all charities, organizations, associations were pushing to get the above the line deduction. And in the Senate version, which was the final version, they established a $1,000 per person above the line deduction, or for a couple, $2,000. And it is a way that you can get tax savings from making a gift without itemizing. And remember that when the Tax Cut and Jobs Act was passed in 2017, we saw a significant drop in people itemizing returns. It went from, I'd say, around 45% down to 21% itemized. And the charities felt that the non-itemizing hurt them. There are other reasons why the itemization changed. A lot had to do with the state and local sales tax. But the bottom line is that charities pushed hard to get this above the line deduction. And this $1,000, $2,000 deduction goes off your income before you pay your taxes. And the new term that they've added to this discussion is the modified adjusted gross income. Adjusted gross income is where you pay your taxes. Now we have the modified adjusted gross income. I don't know whether it's Maggie or the Magi. The word for the new tax law is ABBA, like the Swedish band, but it's more of an ABBA than an ABBA, just to distinguish it. So when you talk about it as an insider, you say, well, the ABBA has some new Magi in it or Maggies. Who knows? That's the beauty of tax law. But with a little bit more depth on that, is that even itemizers can take this $1,000 above the line, $2,000, if their charitable deductions don't exceed 0.5% of their adjusted gross income. And that's sort of where you were saying about the 5% or the 0.5% rule. Basically, they've created a floor for charitable giving. So let's say that you had an income of $100,000 of income, and your charitable giving would have to be in excess of $500 for you to itemize. Mm-hmm. And I'm not clear yet, and I don't think the rules have been I'm not clear if you start from zero or you start from that floor of 0.5%. I'm leaning towards anything above 0.5% becomes deductible. Let's say you didn't do enough of that to make the floor. You can go back and take the above the line $1,000 deduction or $2,000, even if you itemize. So that's one of the good things about the above the line, is that it's an incentive for charitable giving regardless. And the feds believe that it'll cost the Treasury about $73 billion in lost taxes over the next 10 years. Maybe that's $73 billion that'll be new money. Maybe it'll be $73 billion of money we hadn't seen going through taxes, but we've been seeing. So it's an incentive for people to give more if they want to, and it's a good thing. Happy to talk more about the charitable deduction or any other phases of it. I just start getting excited before you know it, I'm off to the races.
Well, no, I think that's the one that most of us have been thinking the most about, and all of these pieces are important. But before we walk away from that, it sounds like this would be viewed as a net positive by most of the people in our field. Is that right?
Correct. It was something that universally the charities pushed hard on. I know through our Charitable Gift Planners organization, our Washington lobby group was pushing it, AFP was pushing it, AHA, you name it, it's been pushed. And the other thing they were pushing is that they wanted qualified charitable deductions, QCD, from IRA to be able to go into a donor advised fund. And the bottom line is that the tax writers, the tax policy staff came to sort of the charities, if you will, and said, look, you can have one or the other, which one do you want? And the charitable universal message was, let's go for the above the line, push the DAF down the road. So if you'd heard about this DAF to QC or QCD to DAF, it wasn't in the legislation for clarity purposes.
And do you think that makes any difference in terms of people's inclination to give, either generally or through a DAF?
Well, I think that the $1,000 appeals to a much broader audience. People who use a DAF, right now your DAFs are limited really to 501c3s. Your 509 supports don't count, but community foundations do. Mm-hmm. I think it was a more sophisticated giving tool that didn't have real significance for charities, because we know that, let's say, roughly 35% of all money in DAFs never gets distributed. And that's, again, very rough numbers, but we know that there's an issue around distribution from DAFs. So let's take that 1,000 and move on.
And then that's really the big carve out when we're talking about individuals, right there, is the itemizers, non-itemizers, and the 1% of the 5%. If we were to switch for just a second, because I know this isn't what you focus on, but just a second to corporate, and that's what many people are, obviously interested in the sector, because corporate giving both has apparently gone up. That's what we've seen from the Giving USA stats, but also because so many organizations rely on that kind of corporate support locally. There's now a 1% floor on corporate giving that's been introduced. What does that mean, and what are the implications?
Well, we don't know precisely for a clear answer. The bottom line is we know that from Giving USA report of 2024 that corporate giving is up surprisingly, and it was up in excess of inflation and in its normal pattern. So yes, it's an issue. The question becomes they can deduct in excess of 1%. We're back to that same threshold question that we talked about with the 0.5%. Is
Mhm.
that can they deduct then the whole from zero up, or does it start above 1%? Or we need regs. We need clarity on this legislation because I don't know that anyone has a clear answer. And we've discussed it. It's debated. We all have our ideas. We hope that it'll be from zero, but they have to hit the 1%. Hard to answer that question at this point, but it's a real issue.
Yeah, and you were mentioning a moment ago that when it came to the charitable deduction, of course, it was all the names we know in our field, from AFP to so forth, arguing for something that would democratize philanthropy, make it possible for more
Sure.
people to have an incentive to give if taxes are in fact that. Um, who would be the people who would be arguing for corporate giving to have some kind of incentives to give, but also to have clarity in there in doing so? Are there some people who are lobbying and knocking on doors in the Hill for that?
I honestly, again, I'm more of a personal tax person. Let me just carve out my zone. There are people pushing for it. You have to remember that the bill was passed July 4th. We already have a bill in Congress to put the IRS pre-tax software program back in place for all 50 states, even though it was wiped out in this legislation.
Oh,
If you follow the legislation, in the old days, if you were a gambler, what would happen is your losses would be deductible against 100% of your winnings. So you could, well, they made it 90%. It's only deductible against 90% of your winnings. And we already have legislation pending in Congress to bring it up to 100%. So there are many groups out there pushing different areas. I'm sure that whether it's the corporate entities, the national charities, there's pressure,
and
definitely pressure to get it done.
I guess with all the things we're discussing now, and we'll be discussing both today, but also in the future, it's not fixed forever, right? I mean, the law that was passed on July 4th is something we need to think about today, but there are people working to make modifications as we speak.
There are, and some things were passed permanently. The whole entire Tax Cut Job Act of 17 was adopted, locked in forever. Boom, done. Along the way, they increased the threshold for the estate tax. This year it was 13,990,000, 14 million, and it's indexed. Well, they bumped it up to 15 million in this legislation and indexed it going forward. So they jumped it up a little bit. Lots of things, nip and tucks here, cuts, slices, dicing. It's a very complex piece of legislation. And the IRS really has to weigh in. Remember, they're going to have to change your W 2 forms before the end of the year to report for your tips, for your overtime, and need extra lines in the W 2s. The IRS has so many things they have to do. And the workforce that started at about 100,000 at the beginning of the year is now around 60,000. So there's real concerns about how long it will take to roll out these regs. And I add, remember that they passed the tax law, the tax law that allowed for 10-year rule on IRAs that had to be phased out, whether a Roth or all the payments had to be phased out. It took them 4 years to come out with the regulations. So it was passed in 19, and it wasn't until 2024 they gave us clarity on the regulations, which, long story. So who knows?
Well, and you were just talking about tips, which I can't imagine applies to, it may apply to some people in our sector, but probably not a lot. But one thing that definitely does is, and we didn't discuss this in advance, so I'm throwing another one at you, but I know you're getting good at hitting those balls if they're anywhere near the plate. And that's about the excise tax on executive compensation over $1 million. And just to explain this to our audience, first of all, we're talking now about our leadership. So can you explain, first of all, what is this? And then secondly, is this something we should be thinking about in terms of compliance, finance, potential budgetary impact?
I honestly, that is not something I know about. My clients, I wish we had donors who are making more than $1 million a year. in our base, but it's an issue. And they really, the taxes haven't increased so much. I mean, the excise taxes are sort of I'm not an expert there. It's better not to even reflect on it.
But I guess the question is really about if there's a CEO of a nonprofit, of a charitable organization, they're earning
Oh,
over a
that I'm
million.
sorry. Yeah, it's an issue, clearly, because a nonprofit could be a university.
Yes.
Who are the highest paid people in a university? Football coaches. Who knows? Could affect the outcome of the national football championship.
Well, there may be some other elements in here too that are kind of buried. One we did discuss glancingly before we went live has to do with endowments, I believe.
Yes,
Would you touch on that and just explain,
sure.
what that's about,
Uh,
but also what it means to us?
Surely. Well, prior to this year, colleges above a certain level had to pay a 1.4% tax on their endowment as it came in. In the House version, they had it up to, I think, 21%. In the final Senate version, they had it up to 8%, but they hit levels of, a ratio of students to dollars. And where it impacted most was universities that have large graduate programs. So that if I have a medical school, I have a business school, I have a public policy school, I have a lot of students.
Mm-hmm.
And it adds up. They also created a hierarchy of payment schedules. The big issue is they removed the protections for religious entities for paying the tax. So Notre Dame is going to be paying taxes on its endowment this year for the first time. So again, lots going on there. Major issues for the university groups to deal with.
I'm just wondering, if there are other things kind of buried in there that apply to subsectors in the same way that you just mentioned universities. I know in the past, for example, I don't think it was a part of this act, but I may be wrong about that, which has to do with internal cost recovery rates or overhead rates. And for example, there was been a lot of discussion about trying to cap that at 15% when many universities have substantially more, and those funds are viewed as essential to being able to operate, let's say, a research department or a lab,
Right.
something of that nature. Is there other information kind of buried in there that applies to higher ed or maybe some other subsectors like healthcare or others?
It could, again, I got to tell you, when I don't know, I don't know. Is the simplest answer. The simple line is, you can talk to me in any language, but Greek, ask me anything. And you speak to me in Hungarian, I go, well, it's all Greek to me. It's my simple response there. One thing we didn't touch on, though, which is particularly for high net worth donors,
Hmm.
is that we talked about the 5.5% floor on gifts. They also set a ceiling of 35% of adjusted gross income on your itemization. And the concern is, and it showed up in writing and nobody's really clear yet, is if I'm in the 37% bracket, which is the highest bracket, I'm
Hmm.
losing 2 cents of deduction per dollar with that 35% cap of 35% on AGI. So there's been some concerns that this will be a disincentive for major donors. I don't think so, because remember that you can carry forward your charitable deduction for 5 years after the year of the gift. So yeah, I'm going to lose 2 cents maybe per dollar in my gift this year. I can carry it forward for 5 years. So again, not so critical with everything, but it's a reality. And that question can come up is, well, I'm not getting my full deduction. Well, you got 5 more years to use it if you don't. So, and particularly in changing gifts, like you mentioned, those are substantial one-time gifts. They're not giving away that necessarily every year, just as an aside.
Well, I was just trying to do the math in my head because when we hear about a bill and we're not familiar with the Hill as you are, and we hear 2 cents, it sounds like, well, what's 2 cents? But can you give us an example of how that might play out? I mean, for a donor and how that could be
Sure.
meaningful?
Let's say I'm in the 37% tax bracket. That means that at a certain level of income, every dollar above that level is taxed 37 cents on the dollar.
Hmm.
And the problem is, if I'm in that level and I only get a deduction for 35% of that dollar, I'm, quote, losing a deduction of 2 cents per dollar. But two things on that. One, you can carry forward that money. It was a charitable deduction that you couldn't use. So you have a 5 year window to use it. Secondly, one of the things is they took away what we call the Peace Amendment, which, and it's spelled PEACE. The Peace Amendment was a congressman who put when you totaled up your itemization, all your expenses, then once you got above $97,000, it was reduced down by 3% on a sliding scale. So one sort of cutoff that they used is gone, and they now have another cutoff in place at the 35%. So again, this is where good tax advice counts. And one thing I tell anybody, any of the people we work with, please talk to your own advisors. They know your situation best, and they're the ones who can guide you in this process.
Well, I guess that leads to kind of the big, broad question, which is, as organizations are thinking about what this means to them, other practical moves they should take besides and in addition to talking to a knowledgeable a tax attorney or accountant that will help them
Sure.
prepare for these things.
If I'm an organization, I should know my market. That's the first rule. Who are my donors? Are they high net worth individuals? If I'm a university, some of the universities under the biggest fire have formed their own passionate for our school group that will support it and drive through and add more money to help fight it. Um, it really, if you have a market of mid range, or you're a food bank or a local, you talk about community versus big entities. I have to know my market, and I have to adapt as I can. So if you're a small to mid-sized charity, the above a line thing is pretty cool. Not so much worrying about the 35% cap. Different issues, but needs to be addressed. If I have a working class, I can, say, hey, remember that now you're getting X dollars of non-tax. Well, you should maybe want to put some of it towards our program. So a lot of issues. And I know, we're coming up on time, but one thing I want to add, if I may, is at the Giving Institute, after the Tax Cut and Jobs Act had been passed, and one of the things that they had done in there was, if I am an alumni of a school and I want to buy football tickets, I would have to pay sort of a ticket rights package. And we were, all of us were like, oh my goodness, that's going to kill people putting money in for taxes, right? Can't get that 20%. And we had the university, the president of a large university. I think, I'm not sure if you were there for that one. The president of a large university and the head fundraiser of the athletic department. And this school was a pretty powerful football team, all sorts of good stories. The bottom line is, one of us got brave and asked the athletic director, will that hurt you? He said, nah, our people don't care. They want their tickets. And I think that while we deal with all these tax issues, we have to remember mission and purpose and why people give. And it is a belief in mission that drives it. Taxes are a nice story. You get informed, you maybe draw some attention, but the bottom line is, if they believe in your mission, they'll work through this stuff and really deliver what you need to carry forward your own mission. I just always like that story because it reminds us that it's not, the taxes are a nice hook, but in the end, it's the mission.
In fact, I know that the surveys in the past have indicated that taxes are usually number 9 or 10 on a list of 10 things that influence giving, and that would be true irrespective of the person's wealth or lack of it. But it's also about creating an atmosphere of discussion about philanthropy, and we
Yes.
began by talking about things like trust, and the difference in the way people trust nonprofits. It's 57% sounds pretty good, but that means a lot of people don't trust them. But then only 33% of the people in that independent sector surveyed trusting philanthropy, which is very interesting because we rely on philanthropy to make things work. So maybe another question is, in an environment where we are discussing legislation and taxes and whether or not you can trust an organization to do its work, or whether or not you can trust the government to do its work, how does all of this, in your mind, looking back over the course of the work that you've done, how might this impact the way people think about our organizations? If it's not about money, maybe it's about something else. What are the broader issues we need to be thinking about?
Well, first of all, if we look at, and I'm a pastor, and I know that our national church, people used to give to the national church. And then what's happened is they started giving to local things that the church sponsored as opposed to supporting the hierarchy. And now a lot of what is religious giving has been surpassed by GoFundMe. And we're starting to track it, as you know, as Giving USA, we're starting to track, trying to get a handle on giving GoFundMe type monies and how that is that charity? What is it? It's,
Right.
um, and I think that's what is working is we're trusting more locally, and that's where, again, if your market is local, that above the line thing becomes so important because it's a very clear thing on your, well, it should be when they get the tax reform filed, it should be very clear. So again, I come back to belief in mission and clarity of mission and purpose as the key to fundraising successfully.
Bill, I appreciate this, and I know that Lieve isn't here yet, so maybe I should ask you another question, which is, if you were doing one thing besides, of course, talking to a good accountant at an organization right now, what's that one big piece of advice you'd give people as they're thinking about that meeting next week with their board to implement what they've just learned?
My key would be that you have confidence in your mission, you have clarity of purpose, and you have a board that supports you in it. Because a board that is committed and passionate is powerful. And we know studies show the more your board gives, the more likelihood that other people will give. So it's very important to have confidence in mission. And this is trendy stuff that will gather people's attention. You need to be informed to explain why it matters to your organization.
Thank you so much for all this, Bill. If people want to learn more about your work and follow your thoughts on this subject and others, how can they
Sure.
reach out to you?
Sure. Green Oak Consulting, www.greenoakconsulting, all one word, and W. McMorran, McMorran at greenoakconsulting.com. And I'm happy to talk, call me, whatever. Happy to do it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. And we'll make sure to put that also in the show notes and to have that in the chat. Thank you, Bill.
Great.
And
Jay, thank you so much. Have a good day, sir. And best to Lieve too.
we spend a lot of time on this program talking about what needs to change in the world, how philanthropy, fundraising, and leadership can evolve to meet the urgent social challenges of the moment and beyond. But what about how we're doing that, how we work? What if we can not only increase our performance and impact, but actually feel better doing it? Our next guest has built her career in helping leaders and teams do just that, and she's going to do it for us right now. Lieve Hendren is a strategy consultant, certified coach, senior consultant at Alfred Group, a group that I'm sure you know. She's worked with over 600 leaders across 87 organizations, from local nonprofits to national brands like McDonald's and Coke, guiding them to align their vision, elevate performance, and build stronger, healthier teams. And she's also the author of The Joyful Flow Formula: Unlock Peak Performance, Eliminate Overwhelm, and Thrive in Work and Life. Lieve, thank you so much for being here to share these secrets, especially today.
Thank you so much, Jay. The pleasure is truly mine. And I am so excited to connect with your audience, in part because I feel this topic is more timely now than ever. We look at the changes and volatility that's been happening in the nonprofit sector since the beginning of 2025. I'm regularly hearing from clients this ever increasing urgency, need, and the challenge can feel overwhelming, like this mountain that continues to grow, and one step forward unlocks 5 additional steps that need to be taken. And so I'm really excited to talk about ways that we can support you who are listening right now in figuring out how you and your team can use some of these principles so that you have the energy that you need to connect with your mission. The reason that we get into the nonprofit sector, we are called, we want to make an impact. And at the same time, when we are experiencing these times of overwhelm, it's really easy to get caught in burnout, compassion fatigue, and that negative spiral that is so draining given all the mounting pressures. I'm really excited to talk about my framework, my research-backed framework for how to approach productivity so that individuals and teams as well can get into a flow state and have that spiral upward effect where you begin to build momentum and make sure that you maintain the energy that can propel your work.
Let's start right there. Let's talk about flow. And can you title the book The Joyful Flow Formula, but let's define what that means. What does joyful flow mean to you?
I'd love to begin by defining the word flow. in the work context. So the word flow can actually mean four things. The research psychologically into flow came from Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. He's a Hungarian psychologist and researcher who really founded this body of work and recognized that accessing the flow state is a teleological meaningful event, meaning a lot of people he interviewed described accessing the flow state as a peak life experience, intrinsically rewarding in and of itself. And I don't know about you, Jay, but when I'm working on a project, I know it's making an impact. I feel like I'm living my purpose. It can feel really exciting. Have you experienced that?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful. Good.
I have to say that one thing that hit me was you said teleological, and I feel like I need a bell on my desk for when people use a word that's never been used in this forum before. I love that. But yes, the flow state, absolutely. When did you encounter it personally? Because this is something you've studied. I know you're going to share that with us, but what about for you personally?
I love that you asked this, Jay. So there are four different ways we can access the flow state. The first and the most researched is in sports performance, or in other extreme performance, such as theater. And I actually began my career as a trained opera singer. So I feel like I had a leg up because when performing an operatic role, really one has to be in the flow state in order to sustain that kind of a performance mindset for usually over an hour. And then I realized that one can also access the flow state in just ambient daily activities like mindfully doing yoga. That would be a really popular one. But in a work context, focused, deep work where you're completely absorbed, your brain is in its optimal state of creativity, and there's no negative stress. What's so special about that focused flow state is your inner critic fades away. That's one of the reasons it can be so meaningful. You finally get that release because you're so engaged in the activity at hand. And then the fourth flow state is what we're doing right now, and having a group conversation. We're really focused and having a brainstorming session. And I find with my clients, especially in the nonprofit sector, accessing that flow state is critical for major gift fundraising.
And really
Right.
challenging. I mean, you just mentioned two things that many people find extremely, almost debilitating. And one is performance, standing on a stage and vocalizing, which requires immense preparation, as well as then your ability to just get into that flow state in performance. And then the other is doing it in a form like this. And it doesn't matter if it's a podcast or you're speaking on a TED stage or whatever you're doing, you have to access something and then not have that negative element, which you just mentioned. So what's the difference between flow and joyful flow?
Yes, I'm so grateful that you brought that back up. The reason I added joyful flow into my book title is because it's a little bit counterintuitive. But when one is experiencing joy, it actually primes you to access a state of flow. And I realized through my research that you can use joy as a trigger to make it easier to get into the flow state. A lot of people, in my experience, feel that pressure to perform at work. And then they are so hyper focused on the outcome, on what needs to happen, they lose the connection of joy in their work. So I included the joyful piece because before you can access the flow state, you have to connect with a source of joy. And I actually structured the book. It's not a linear book. It's kind of a choose your own adventure book. So I structured the book with different performance psychology techniques that anyone can use to connect with a source of joy that will help them drop into the flow state.
And I'm wondering, how did you discover that personally, once again? Because part of this is an intellectual component. I mean, it's studying it and understanding it, how to structure it and then explain it to others. And that's one part of the way we think. But another part is just, having the apple fall on your head. So what was your Isaac Newton moment?
I love that you asked that, Jay, these personal questions. It's so much fun to be able to share those personal stories. And when I started my career, I realized, as I shared earlier, that the type of flow I was experiencing in sports and operatic performance wasn't necessarily, there wasn't an environment for it in my workplace. I was at a very intense strategy consulting group, as you mentioned. And it was really hard to access my joy. And I actually let myself experience so much stress that I developed an autoimmune disorder when I was working that job. You know, the mental and the physical stress became deeply chronic, and it expressed with an autoimmune disorder. And one of the consequences of that was I began developing these really truly debilitating headaches every afternoon. And so I realized in order to keep my job and meet my performance expectations, I had to work in a third of the time of my other colleagues, because then I usually would get a headache. And that's what really pushed me to see outside of the box and start doing research, thinking there has to be a better way, a way that's more sustainable, and a way that can allow high performance without leading to that type of deep burnout.
And that's something that we obviously experience a lot in this sector, but you've worked across the sectors, as you just said. So from nonprofits and philanthropy to the Fortune 500s, are there any particular kind of pain points that show up again and again, regardless of the organizational type, that you've identified that this kind of methodology can help people to kind of cope with, or maybe to liberate themselves from, if necessary?
Yes, and actually I'll take an example, if I might, from the corporate sector, because really interesting way that the corporate sector approaches project planning are the intensity of quarterly earnings reports, right? Where they have to transparently communicate with their stakeholders how their bottom line is typically. And at the same time, structuring a team and a personal performance around quarterly planning is so strong. It helps teams keep that intrinsic motivation, because it's just 90 days. You know, if you consider a really audacious goal, Jay, 30 days is probably going to be too small to make meaningful traction on it. It's a little too small. 90 days is going to be that sweet spot. If you set a goal that's a year in the future, it's going to be really hard to motivate, stay focused, and gain traction on it. And so when I'm working with clients for organizational transformation, or trying to shift a dynamic, then 90 days and structuring planning in that time frame, really going all in and focusing on that, gives such a wonderful opportunity to plan, and at the end of the 90 days, learn from that time frame before going into the next quarter. So I'm a huge proponent of aligning productivity principles around the quarter.
It's interesting because those quarterly deadlines are, like you were alluding to, so challenging, I think, in the financial services sector, where everything is this deadline driven as opposed to getting into the flow. But if that 90 days gives us a chance for kind of personal transformation or a different way of viewing the work, that's very liberating by comparison. Maybe you can take us kind of a little bit through the formula, how people get there, whether it's 90 days or 120 or whatever is necessary. I guess it depends on the person, the project, doesn't it? But how does the formula help them to kind of see a pathway from where they are to where they need to be?
May I ask you for a personal example? Because I would love if perhaps there's something that you've been wanting to do but haven't done yet, because it's just a little bit tough, that maybe takes between 1 to 3 hours, no more. Just 1 to 3 hours.
I'm glad you didn't say 1 to 3 years, because I had the example for that one already. Well, 1 to 3 hours. Wow, it's really challenging, because it seems like everything. Well, I write case statements occasionally, and those can be very stressful, because what we're looking to do there, at least what I'm looking to do, is to take a bunch of different voices, not just the facts, but the voices, and then see if there's a way of creating something that isn't Ultron. It's a an identity within the piece that's reflective of the organizational mission. So it's not just nuts and bolts and dollars and cents. It's also, who are we now? Who do we want to be in the future? How do we save lives and change lives? And sometimes if the audience cannot hear itself in that piece, then it's difficult. So I will find myself, to get to your question, muddling through all the material I gather, which is kind of like trash collection project. I just gather tons of stuff and then sit there staring at it as if it's going to just emerge from the ruins of my research. And so that could take me from 1 to 3 hours, but it could also take me from 1 to 3 days before I actually start typing, because I just have to ingest it. So I don't know if that's a good example or not, but.
Case writing is the perfect example, Jay. I'm so delighted that you brought it forward. And what I'm hearing is, when you write a case, you want to make sure that everyone who reads it really sees themselves reflected in the case. And you want it to have that like heart and soul, where you're casting an inspiring vision that requires a little bit of creativity, right? You need to put yourself in a state in order to effectively write a case statement where you're synthesizing a huge amount of information and doing it in a way that's creative and unique. We're not going to get an effective case statement probably right from an AI bot, because we need that human touch and that human element.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because now increasingly people are reliant on, and I use frequently, AI tools, but they do lack some kind of emotional tenor. It's sort of like when you talked about performance. There's a big difference between just reading the music and singing it, if you can hit the notes, and then interpreting the music, which is quite different. And maybe that's not the best analogy, but you do feel the heart of something when a person writes it and touches it, if they're doing it with sincerity, that is lacking if it's just Chat GPT alone.
That's exactly why this is such a great example, because you really need to tap into that human element to make that soul to soul connection that I also, in my case writing, haven't found quite. That AI doesn't exactly know how to capture that. And that makes sense, because it's can sometimes be trite. We're looking to connect in a way that's unique and soulful. And so if I were working with you to help get ready for like a 1 hour case writing session, then the first question I would actually ask is for you to really deeply connect with the purpose. When you connect with the purpose, I like to call it having crystal clarity on the purpose. There are two important pieces to that will help your brain better relax and get into the flow state, which is really cool. One, this isn't going to be a surprise, connecting with the bigger why, right? And case writing is a great example with this. We're trying to connect a mission. At the same time, you need to translate your personal mission and how it connects to the organization's, bigger mission of having a really fantastic case. So not just writing their mission, which might be, let's say if it's a school, it might be an educational mission. Then maybe part of your mission to serving the nonprofit sector is supporting and inspiring students to be the best that they can be. That certainly is part of my mission. And in addition to that big macro why, you want to articulate your purpose in something that's hyper specific and achievable. Like, I'm going to type, and my fingers are going to type on the keys for 60 minutes. And I don't have to type if I don't want to, but I'm not going to do anything else. This is kind of a butt in the chair just for an hour. But usually what happens is, if you give your brain a specific hyper achievable parameter, you'll find that you can drop into the flow state and you might continue, longer. So it's kind of giving yourself that end point prematurely that helps your brain be able to focus on the task at hand. Really specifically, you have a clear definition of what success looks like.
I imagine that completing this book required getting into that state as well. So assuming that's true, was this a 90-day project for you? Because you drew that as one example. I know it's only one, but sometimes writing a book can take years. Sometimes it takes minutes. So in deciding to take this on, the research, but also the writing of it, was that a kind of a flow state project?
I love this parenthetical. It absolutely was a flow state project, and I loved every part of the process of writing the book, which I do think makes my writing process a little bit unique. I can't say that I did it all in 90 days, but I broke up my milestones exactly into 90 days, which helped me stay accountable. And it took about 3/4 to finish the first draft, which I'm really proud of.
Yes, and when did it? When was the release date? I didn't ask you that at the top. I apologize. When was it released?
It was last year. I
Last year.
released it last year, so it's still fairly new.
Yes,
Is it all right if we go back to the case
please.
writing example?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So once we have that crystal clarity of purpose, both the macro why and that micro, exact time block that will support your brain, this is actually the pivotal moment where most people get up from their desk and get a cup of coffee. And I'd love to explain the reason behind that. There is a 5 to 10 minute challenge zone that's completely normal and healthy whenever doing something new that's outside of your comfort zone. And I love to encourage my clients to remember this research that the challenge zone sweet spot is actually 4%, 4% harder than what you're used to doing. So it's real. I find that that's very helpful to calibrate. Yes, you want to challenge yourself, but not too much. And it's just going to be a reality that when you're taking on a hard project, like a new case statement, it's going to be hard when you get started. So just like level set that in your head. But there are ways to make it feel more comfortable. What typically happens is we sit down, we have clarity of our purpose, and we start to feel like a physical emotion, that discomfort from the challenge of what we're working on. Some people feel it like a constriction in their chest. Some people feel it like a pit in their stomach or a tightening of their shoulders or a constriction of the jaw. Those are 4 common things to look out for. And then subconsciously, we walk away to refill our coffee. And our mind doesn't like that because we haven't fulfilled a commitment that we just internally made to get our work done. And it can kind of haunt us. So I love to support clients instead preempt that process by knowing it's going to feel hard. It's supposed to feel hard. It's good that it feels hard. It's something meaningful that you're working on. And preempt that by getting present. Some people that looks like breathing exercises, stretching, taking a dance break. Being present can look like a lot of different things for a lot of different people. But if you take that time to get present and like physically in your body, which is a little bit different from our work context. We often think of work as our brain alone, but there's an important brain-heart connection. So if we take that time to get present in our body, the challenge is just going to feel easier. And then it's going to be much, much easier to stick with the purpose and drop into flow.
And as you're coaching people through that process to be prepared for that 4% or whatever that time is when you're encountering, I guess, a hurdle, and you just know that you have to leap over it or around it or get around it. What are some of the tools and techniques that you suggest to people to understand that obstacle for what it is, that it's surmountable?
The question is, what are techniques to understand and notice that the obstacle is surmountable?
Yes.
Yeah, my favorite.
To look out for it and they'll be able to surmount it. Yes.
Exactly. It's a wonderful question. So I do like to help clients figure out what's their internal trigger, like what's the physical trigger. Once they notice that, then it's a little bit easier. For teams, it's harder to do that kind of embodiment work, but a very easy tool that anyone can use is starting a meeting or a conversation or a work session by articulating 3 things that you're grateful for. And I would really encourage you and the listener to actually articulate it, write it down, speak it aloud. Gratitude puts your body in a state of coherence.
I'm wondering, when you make those recommendations to organizations that have found themselves in kind of a state of rigidity, that they are not used to dealing with one another in that way, or they haven't for a while, or maybe there's some distrust perhaps among the people in that crowd, in that group. What are some of the ways that you can help them to overcome that, to embrace that, and especially that kind of the expressions of gratitude, which are very personal and somewhat vulnerable?
I appreciate you acknowledging that, yes, expressing gratitude is personal and vulnerable, and it can sometimes, I mean, usually does with working with new clients, feel very awkward and a little bit out of place, right? If it's not part of the culture. I am a huge proponent of putting it first on every single meeting agenda. And not everyone needs to participate, but even putting it as a cognitive nudge, appreciations, celebrations, especially if it's time to celebrate others, might be hard for folks to articulate their own personal gratitudes in a corporate setting. But taking a moment to appreciate, oh my goodness, this team member, I asked him to do something and he delivered above and beyond last week, and I'm really grateful. It's a wonderful way not only to set the tone for a flow state conversation that's going to be hyper creative and great problem solving, but also build that connection and rapport to shift the culture over time.
Right, right. So now I'm imagining that you have a group setting where you're trying to plan for a big project. You know it's going to take time. You've identified the obstacles. You've started by getting in a place where you can permit the flow state to be a part of the fabric of the conversation and the work, by letting people express who they are and what they're grateful for. So all those pieces make a lot of sense. But there must be pits along the road that you encounter as people are, they've encountered that first hurdle. Now they trust each other. They're moving ahead, but they still have different working styles. Maybe they haven't practiced those things together before. What are some of the ways that they can keep tapped into that flow state, or especially as a group, so they can get through the whole project together, not just for the sake of efficiency, but to really enjoy it and to be successful in it together as a team?
And I love how you articulated not just for the sake of efficiency, because yes, but being in the flow state can create 4 to 5 times better problem solving. So there is an efficiency piece to it. But it's more than efficiency, it's also creativity and bonding, and the creative element tends to be something that is difficult to create in our workplace. So I appreciate you sharing that. Just tactically, a couple of pieces like for facilitating that type of brainstorm conversation, really helpful if the facilitator, again, frames the meeting with a clear, what's the purpose of today's meeting? That's the micro, right? What will we want to leave today having explored or decided or considered that will make today's meeting a success, as well as the macro vision. So what is the vision and end goal? And as a hyper specific tool, I recommend casting that vision in the present tense, as if you were there. The reason behind that is because your brain doesn't know the difference between a past memory and a future memory necessarily. So when you use that future language as if it were already done, as if we were already having the impact, I use this specifically in case writing, right? You can see you're bringing people into that vision. One of the best examples of this, Martin Luther King, I have a dream. He describes and brings you into the dream. It's so powerful. So using that type of a tense You don't even have to change the content, but using that tense, it really helps support the group. And if the group begins to wander onto a tangent, a rabbit hole, a side conversation, just take note of that. Have that like piece of paper over on the side of the wall of rabbit holes or whatever you want to call it. Some people call it the parking lot, and redirect the conversation to today's agreed upon outcome.
Let me ask you about that, because I love the example you just gave of the Dr. King speech. And if I'm remembering this right, I don't remember who said it to him. It was a very important woman in the crowd right there on the dais with him, who said to him, "Tell him about the dream, Martin." And he wasn't going to talk about that. It's my understanding in the script, in the text of what his speech that day. But then he just jumped into it. I'm wondering, maybe also, if you can talk about how sometimes the parking lot or the rabbit holes are also a place from which we can draw additional, energy from the crowd, so to speak, crowdsourcing from the trusted, so that we can continue that energy that lets us also move through the project, because sometimes the ideas emerge from strange places.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is that openness, which is absolutely important of a great high performing team, to divergent thoughts, to creative ideas, to interjections and that interplay. And connection is a really huge piece of the flow state. Obviously, we're talking about teamwork. Having that give and take, it kind of creates this extra element and energy. So, what I'm hearing in your example is a little bit of the power of reflective listening, which I do believe helps people to feel seen, to feel really heard, and keeps a conversation, especially if we have a lot of people brainstorming about a topic, just those quick check-ins to make sure that we're on track and people feel heard. So taking that time to share what I'm hearing you say is da 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 da, and then connecting with the feeling behind it. Creativity, creating that joyful environment does also recognize, okay, are you feeling a little stressed about this? Is that something that we need to explore? Or, okay, I'm feeling that you're really inspired, Jay, about this vision, right? I'm assumed that the woman in the crowd was feeling that inspiration and reflecting that back to Dr. King, and then that inspired him, and that reflection back and created that synergistic effect.
Yeah. I do want to ask you about something that's going to be very practical for our listeners, which is taking everything you've just described and then applying that across a very long trajectory, right? You've got this big longitudinal project, and it's a capital campaign. So if you were advising an organization, which I'm sure you've done, to look 3 to 5 years down the road and maintain that state, or be able to activate it, because maybe you can't stay in a joyful flow for 5 years. I don't know, maybe you can. But how do you advise them to be able to look forward with that kind of duration and still maintain, to be able to tap into that thing they need in order to sustain that energy and bring this thing to its successful conclusion together as a team?
Right. So I would respond to that as you're asking, how do we create the momentum for sustained intrinsic motivation? And I want to add in that term intrinsic motivation, because our corporate clients are great at extrinsic motivation, meaning we're going to inspire our workers with extra salary increases and extra vacation days and outside factors. And yet in our nonprofit sector, most of the professionals I find are intrinsically motivated. They have a calling, a desire to make an impact on others, a desire to see the impact. And usually when I ask people around the room to identify their top intrinsic motivator, 95% of my nonprofit audiences want to make a contribution to others. It's the social impact, right? Social good.
Right.
It's the theme of our conversation. And so having those quarterly check-in sessions to really level set, talk through, how are we making an impact? This campaign is 5 years down the road. I've been on longer campaigns. I fully understand that it can feel like a grind. for me with my clients often a campaign committee meeting every quarter. If we have a time to start with a mission moment, inspires the staff, inspires our volunteers if they're working, and really deeply take that time to reconnect to the direct impact we're having. It doesn't necessarily have to be human-to-human interaction, but usually there's some work that we're building towards in the future vision of the campaign. Articulate that future vision, why it's going to be meaningful, why similar projects have been meaningful in the past. This is where spending a quarterly time to really dive into your core values and how you're operationalizing them as an organization, right? Not just what the idea of the value is, but through the campaign, we're living into our core value of excellence in our sector by really committing to this ambitious, beautiful facility that's going to support our staff, for example. So the core values, the mission, and then the vision piece, revisiting that on a quarterly basis, I think is really critical.
And I bet from a practical level, that also makes space for the people who come in and out of that project over the life of it, because we have people who move on, or they have other things that they need to do, or they pass away, but the project is still there.
The project is still there. We want to engage people. Another really fun tool, if I can just add, most people work and focus without taking enough breaks. It's really, really important to take breaks. And the reason is you don't want to burn yourself out by having your last experience of working on a project be negative. We want to celebrate when we achieve something, even if it's 20 minutes of focus. So I'm a huge proponent of gamifying whatever we can, making it fun for people to say, oh, hey, I did my 5 reach out emails and now I'm going to ring this bell. So you make it into a game.
I have a feeling you may have answered my ultimate question here, which is that I think a lot about this in terms of this sector and what we do as teams and the projects, but in reality, we're all just people. And we've got to figure out how to go from this to the next thing. And I think you've just told us to bear in mind that we're human and we all need a break once in a while, especially after something tough. But if you were to leave the audience with one thing they could do that lets them have access to that flow state, to the joyful flow state, what's the one thing that could open that door, at least to discovering that?
I'm actually going to recommend a technique. It may or may not be popular, but I would say throw out your to-do list. Throw it out. A to-do list is the worst productivity tool. It creates these endless open loops in your mind. Have you ever had that experience when you're trying to fall asleep and something pops up? It is just awful. Yeah, there it is. There's the to-do list. Yeah, throw out the to-do list. And my book offers a structure for how to instead organize tasks by time. Just skip straight ahead, put it in your calendar, or put it in a weekly list or a monthly list or kind of a future parking lot list. That alone is a first ordering of priorities. And I've seen so many clients be operating in a more peaceful flow state when they approach their whole week. They plan 1 week at a time. All of the tasks go into the appropriate time priority category. And then you can wake up without looking at your to-do list. You just go straight into doing what you know that you need to do.
And I guess it lets us all breathe a little bit easier just doing that alone. Thank you. Thank you, Lieve, very much for all of this. Really do appreciate it. If people want to grab a copy of your book, I know it should be easy to find, but where can people find out more about that and about your work?
Thank you so much. Yes. So you can find out more about my nonprofit work, of course, at alford.com, ALFORD.com. And I do also have a website that dives more into the book. I have a picture, The Joyful Flow Formula. It's a really fun book. I promise. It's a choose your own adventure. It's available on Amazon or on my website, Lieve Hendren.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lieve. Really appreciate it. As you know, we cover these issues every single Tuesday, and we look forward to seeing you next time. And in the meantime, you can also look for our next session in the How to Raise series, which is this Thursday, July 17th, when our CFRE accredited webinar will address the issue of culture check, Retain Your Team, Building Stronger Donor Relationships, featuring Ryan Zapolsky, Director of Development at Smile Train. You'll look at practical strategies to assess and invest in your internal culture so your fundraisers stay longer and your donor relationships grow stronger. And then on this Friday, July 18th, tune in for the PM podcast for a special conversation with Sydney Moss, a recipient of AFP's 2025 Outstanding Youth in Philanthropy Award. At just 17, Sydney is making a global impact through her volunteerism, and you'll hear how she turned a personal mission into an international movement and be able to catch one of her original songs as well. And don't miss our other recent episodes with the chair of AFP, the CEO of Bridge Consulting, and the young man behind Socktober, and much, much more, wherever you like to listen. You can register for any of our upcoming live sessions by visiting the website of our sponsor, DonorSearch, the leader in the use of responsible AI and donor research solutions for the nonprofit fundraising world, at DonorSearch.net. Thanks for spending time with us today. We look forward to seeing you once again next Tuesday at 1 p.m. on Frontlines of Social Good. Until then, take care.